Blobov is a tool that allows you to bake ground shadow planes directly inside the Unity editor. It is designed for Unity's universal render pipeline and generates non-directional soft ground shadows. In this video, I will show you how easy it is to use Blobov in your project and how far you can get using only the default settings. Let's jump into Unity and start generating shadows. I have prepared a scene with some low poly assets. Notice that there is a directional light with soft shadows enabled. This already looks good, but it is not ideal. If we zoom in on the wheel, it does not feel fully grounded. It looks slightly detached from the surface. If we switch to the 2D view and enable the grid, we can see that the lower bounds of the objects are exactly aligned with the ground at y equals 0. There may also be situations where you do not want to use real-time shadows at all. In that case, you can simply disable the real-time shadows entirely. Now let's open Blobov. You can find the ShadowPlaneGenerator under Tools, ShadowPlaneGenerator. The only thing you need to do is drag your game object into the target slot. This works with a single object or with parent object containing multiple meshes. I will drag this wagon into the target slot. For now, we can ignore the default material called Unity URP. It is only used temporarily during shadow generation. You can see that the tool automatically uses the game object name. You can change it here if needed. In the text section, you can define the output folder for the generated texture and materials. For now, we will leave it as it is. The default resolution of 512 pixels is perfectly fine for most cases. Now click Generate Shadow, Blob Shadow. And that's it. I recommend placing the generated shadow plane as a child of your game object. Depending on your workflow, it can also make sense to create a prefab from it. You may also want to move the generated texture material to your preferred asset folder structure. Now let's look at the more advanced settings. We will generate a shadow for this table. Drag the table game object into the target slot. The name is fine, so click Generate. Notice that the shadow plane is currently hidden below the ground. Switch to the 2D view and enable the grid to inspect this more closely. You can see that the lower bounds of the table extend slightly below y equals 0. Ideally, your assets should be prepared so their lowest point aligns exactly with y equals 0. This is considered best practice when creating 3D assets. Let's go back to the perspective view. Instead of fixing this in the original 3D software, we can correct it directly in Blobov. Open the plane section. The plane height offset moves the shadow plane vertically. Let's enter a value of 0.03 and generate again. Now the shadow is correctly positioned. Next, we have the bounds offset parameter. This defines the margin around your object and controls the overall size of the shadow plane. To visualize this, open the shadow material and temporarily enable alpha clipping and set the threshold to 0. You can now clearly see the plane area. If the plane is too large, texture resolution is wasted. Reducing the bounds offset increases texel density and improves quality. Be careful though. If the value is too low, parts of the shadow may get cut off. A value of 0.1 works well here. Now let's look at the shadow layers. Blobov uses 2 layers, Pro Shadow Layer and Contact Shadow Layer. The Pro Shadow Layer represents the overall shadow cast by the object. It should appear soft and slightly transparent. The Contact Shadow Layer represents the area where the object touches the ground. This shadow should be tighter and more defined to reinforce the contact with the surface. Let's start with the Pro Shadow settings. The far clip value defines the vertical range used for shadow calculations. A higher value includes more of the object in the shadow generation. A lower value focuses only on the lower parts. This affects how diffuse the shadows appear. Blur enabled allows you to disable blur for debugging purposes, but for production use, blur is essential. Blur radius controls the strength of the blur. Higher values create smoother shadows. Blur iterations control how many times the blur is applied. Increasing this results in softer and more natural shadows. You can also adjust the overall opacity of the Pro Shadow layer. Now let's look at the contact shadow settings. Here the far clip value should usually be very low, since only the area near the ground contact should be included. The expand parameter slightly enlarges the shadow area. This can help emphasize contact and improve visibility. For contact shadows, avoid excessive blur. These shadows should remain tighter and more defined. One important note: if you change the output resolution of the shadow texture, your existing blur settings will no longer produce the same visual result. This is because blur operates in pixel space. You will need to fine-tune the blur settings again after changing resolution. Finally, let's talk about mesh requirements. Proper object placement is important. The lowest point of your object should ideally align with y equals 0. Another critical requirement is that your meshes should be closed, especially when viewed from bottom to top. If your mesh has open geometry on the bottom, parts of the object may not be detected correctly during shadow generation, which can lead to incomplete shadows. Closed geometry ensures accurate and clean shadow results. Blobov allows you to generate high-quality ground shadows quickly and directly inside Unity, without relying on external tools. This helps you improve visual grounding while keeps your rendering pipeline efficient.